The evening of December 21st, 1988, settled over Lockerbie, Scotland, like any other winter night. It was quiet. Families were preparing for Christmas, just 4 days away. The air was filled with the scent of pine and the low hum of holiday anticipation. No one in that small, peaceful town could have imagined the horror about to fall from the sky. They could not know that their lives and the world of air travel were about to be fractured. The normal rhythm of life was ticking towards an abrupt and violent end, an unimaginable nightmare poised to begin in the dark clouds above. Pan Am Flight 103, a Boeing 747 named Clipper Maid of the Seas, had started its journey in Frankfurt. It was a routine flight, a journey familiar to countless travelers. After a stop in London's Heathrow Airport, it took off for New York's JFK. On board were 259 souls. They were business travelers heading home, families reuniting for the holidays. A large group of 35 American students from Syracuse University, their faces bright with the excitement of returning from a semester full of stories and memories, unaware that their journey was tragically short. Each passenger had a story, a destination, a life waiting for them across the Atlantic. At 7:02 p.m., just 38 minutes after leaving London, the aircraft reached an altitude of 31,000 feet. At that precise moment, something went terribly wrong. High above the sleeping Scottish countryside, a violent, catastrophic explosion ripped through the plane's fuselage. The majestic aircraft, a symbol of modern travel and connection, was instantly torn apart. Communication with air traffic control went silent. The plane simply vanished from their radar screens. For those on board, there was no warning. There was only a sudden final moment as the sky itself seemed to break open, swallowing the aircraft and everyone within it. The people of Lockerbie heard the sound first. It was a deafening roar, a thunder that shook the very foundations of their homes. Then came the fire. A massive section of the plane's wings, still filled with thousands of gallons of jet fuel, plummeted into the Sherwood Crescent neighborhood. It ignited on impact, creating a fireball that soared hundreds of feet into the air and a crater over 150 feet long. 11 residents of Lockerbie, who had been safe in their homes moments before, were killed instantly. The night was no longer quiet. It was filled with the screams of twisted metal, the roar of flames, and a silence where a town used to be. In the immediate aftermath, confusion reigned. Was this a catastrophic mechanical failure? A terrible, unlucky accident? The sheer scale of the wreckage, scattered over 845 square miles, made initial analysis nearly impossible. Investigators from Britain and the United States descended upon the Scottish fields and hillsides. They began the painstaking task of collecting every fragment of the fallen aircraft. They knew the truth was hidden somewhere within that vast, grim puzzle. Each piece of twisted metal, each personal belonging was a clue. It was a slow, methodical process, driven by the need to give answers to the hundreds of grieving families. The breakthrough came from something incredibly small. It was a tiny, scorched fragment of a circuit board, no bigger than a fingernail. This was not part of the plane's intricate systems. Forensic experts identified it as a piece of an electronic timer. Further investigation linked this timer to a specific type of bomb, one known to have been used by certain terrorist groups. The awful truth began to crystallize. This was no accident. The 270 people who died were not victims of a technical fault. They were murdered. Someone had deliberately placed a bomb on that plane, turning a routine flight into a weapon. The investigators now had a new mission to trace the bomb's origin. They focused on the luggage. They pieced together the cargo manifest and the container that was blown apart. They determined the bomb had been hidden inside a Toshiba radio cassette player. It was then packed into a bronze Samsonite suitcase. Through incredible detective work, they traced the purchase of the clothing packed inside that suitcase to a shop in Malta. The evidence suggested the suitcase began its deadly journey there, unaccompanied by any passenger. It was a ghost bag sent on a path of destruction. The trail showed the suitcase was first loaded onto a flight from Malta to Frankfurt. In Frankfurt, it was transferred into the baggage system and loaded onto Pan Am Flight 103 for its first leg to London. Finally, at Heathrow, it was placed in the forward cargo hold of the Boeing 747 bound for New York. The bomb was a sophisticated device designed to detonate at high altitude. It was a cold, calculated act of mass murder, planned with chilling precision. The unseen weapon had slipped through multiple layers of security, an invisible threat that succeeded in bringing terror from the skies. For the people of Lockerbie, the disaster was not a distant news story. It was an apocalypse that landed in their backyards. The crash turned their quiet town into a war zone. The impact of the main fuselage section on Sherwood Crescent vaporized several houses, leaving nothing but a smoldering, deep crater. Homes on either side were obliterated by the blast and ensuing fire. Other parts of the town were hit by a rain of debris, from massive chunks of the engine to smaller, more personal items. The familiar streets were now littered with the wreckage of the aircraft and the belongings of those who had been on board. The emotional and psychological toll on the residents was immense and immediate. They were the first responders. Ordinary citizens rushed out of their homes not to witness the event, but to help. They fought fires with garden hoses and searched for survivors in the wreckage, a hopeless task. They opened their homes to emergency crews providing shelter, food and comfort. But they also witnessed scenes of unimaginable horror. The bodies of the passengers fell from the sky, landing in gardens, on rooftops and in the surrounding fields. The town was suddenly and unwillingly the custodian of the dead. In the days and weeks that followed, Lockerbie became a place of pilgrimage for grieving families from around the world. They came from the United States, from across Europe and beyond. They walked the scarred streets, searching for a connection to their loved ones, trying to comprehend the scale of the loss. The people of Lockerbie, while dealing with their own trauma and the loss of their neighbours, opened their hearts to these visitors. They shared their grief and offered a quiet, steady source of support. A powerful, unspoken bond formed between the town and the families of the victims, a bond forged in shared tragedy. The clean-up was a monumental effort. It took months. Every piece of wreckage had to be collected as evidence. The land itself was scarred, not just by the crater, but by the environmental damage from the jet fuel. Yet the people of Lockerbie were determined to rebuild. They cleaned their streets, repaired their homes, and slowly began to piece their community back together. But the town was forever changed. The name Lockerbie, once a simple Scottish place name, was now synonymous with one of the deadliest acts of terrorism in modern history. The memory of that night is woven into the fabric of the town itself. As investigators confirmed a bomb was responsible, the question shifted from what to who. The motive was widely believed to be revenge, specifically revenge for the 1986 US airstrikes on the Libyan cities of Tripoli and Benghazi. Those strikes were themselves a response to a Libyan-linked bombing of a Berlin nightclub frequented by American soldiers. The trail of the timer and the suitcase from Malta pointed investigators directly toward two suspects, Abdelbasset al-Megrahi and Lamin Khalifa Fima. Both were identified as Libyan intelligence agents. The international community, led by the US and UK, formally accused Libya of orchestrating the attack. Years of political and diplomatic struggle followed. Libya's leader, Muammar Gaddafi, refused to hand over the two suspects. The United Nations imposed strict sanctions, isolating Libya from the rest of the world and crippling its economy. The families of the victims campaigned relentlessly for justice, refusing to let the world forget. They demanded that the men responsible for murdering their loved ones face a court of law. Their persistence kept the pressure on, ensuring that the case did not fade into history. Finally, after nearly a decade of stalemate, a breakthrough was reached. A unique compromise was brokered. Libya agreed to hand over the two men for trial, but not in the US or the UK. Instead, a special Scottish court would be convened on neutral ground at Camp Zeist, a former US airbase in the Netherlands. The trial finally began in 2000. The prosecution presented its complex case, built on the tiny timer fragment, the Maltese shopkeeper's testimony, and intelligence linking the suspects to the operation. In 2001, the court delivered its verdict. Abdelbasset al-Megrahi was found guilty of 270 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison. His co-defendant, Lamin Khalifa Fima, was acquitted. For some, the verdict was justice delivered. But the story did not end there. In 2003, Libya formally accepted responsibility for the bombing and agreed to pay billions of dollars in compensation to the victims' families, a move that led to the lifting of sanctions. However, the government never admitted direct guilt. Then, in 2009, Megrahi was released from a Scottish prison on compassionate grounds as he was suffering from terminal cancer. He returned to a hero's welcome in Libya and died in 2012, protesting his innocence to the end. His release sparked outrage among many of the victims' families and created a deep rift between the UK and US governments. The conviction of one man did not close the book on Pan Am 103. For many, including some of the victims' families, the trial left more questions than answers. Was Megrahi truly the mastermind, or was he a scapegoat, a lower-level operative sacrificed to protect a larger truth? Theories have persisted for decades about the potential involvement of other state actors. Some evidence pointed towards Iran, possibly seeking revenge for the accidental downing of an Iranian passenger jet by a US warship just months before the Lockerbie bombing. Others have suggested a Syrian-backed Palestinian group was initially responsible. These controversies cast a long shadow over the official narrative. There were claims that key evidence was mishandled or even planted. The Maltese shopkeeper's identification of Megrahi has been questioned repeatedly. Some intelligence insiders have hinted that Western agencies had prior warnings of a potential attack on a Pan Am flight but failed to act decisively. These lingering doubts mean that for many, the full story of who ordered, planned, and paid for the bombing of Pan Am 103 has never been told. The search for a complete truth continues, with a third suspect, the alleged bomb maker Abu Aguila Masood, now facing trial in the United States. The human cost of the bombing remains its most powerful and heartbreaking legacy. The 35 students from Syracuse University became a symbol of youth and promise stolen away. Their empty seats at graduation served as a stark, silent memorial. But the grief was global, touching families in 21 different nations. For decades, these families have lived with the pain of their loss, channeling their sorrow into a fight for justice and remembrance. They created memorials, established scholarships, and ensured the world would never forget the names of the 270 people who were killed that night. Their dignity in the face of unimaginable pain has been a constant, powerful force. The attack on Pan Am 103 forced a revolution in aviation security. Before Lockerbie, it was possible for a suitcase to travel on a flight without the passenger who checked it. That changed. New, stricter rules were implemented worldwide, requiring that all checked luggage be matched to a passenger on board. Screening technology for explosives was rapidly developed and deployed. The bombing served as a brutal lesson that commercial airliners were vulnerable targets. The security measures we now take for granted at every airport, the rigorous bag screening, the enhanced checks, are a direct result of the tragedy that fell upon Lockerbie. It is a story that, even today, reminds us of the terrible price of vulnerability and the enduring quest for safety and justice.